Okay, so we're talking about wildlife as a resource for recreation management, and we had gotten through kind of the introductory bit of this chunk on Monday. And so today we have left to talk about the specific species with respect to your visitors, not what your park ecologists are saying, even though there can be some overlap there. What are the wildlife, and more specifically, what are the wildlife characteristics that tend to have your visitors paying a lot of attention to? And for our purposes, we really care about how visitors change their behaviors and their spatial and time distribution around species that your visitors want to pay attention to. So, again, this is in parallel with any zoology, any habitat management classes, any resource management classes that you're taking alongside this class, right? But for our purposes, we want to know what our visitors are doing that's weird, that might end up being a real net benefit to these wildlife species, and we really want to know how might our visitors cause some impacts to, in particular, very charismatic species, very non-charismatic species. So in order to get there, let's talk about some of the characteristics that make or tend to force a species into perception as charismatic or not. So, for our charismatic species, rare, threatened, or endangered, anything that's big, anything that's warm-blooded, anything that's fuzzy, right? So we're talking about larger mammals mostly. Anything that is brightly colored, anything that has weird or inscrutable to the average or typical visitor, strange behaviors like mating rituals, or something that is iconic like the bugle of elk during the rut. A lot of people care a lot about elk, and so when you have elk, or even just the suspicion of elk in your park, the perception kind of doesn't always necessarily match the reality of conditions on site. But when that perception is present, we have ecosystem integrity concerns, because if we have herds of elk, then they are vulnerable to not predation by human visitors unless we have a poaching problem, which is a thing, right? It happens here in southern Illinois, not with elk, but with white-tailed deer. We have people traveling up from Mississippi to shoot our whitetail because they're nicer than the ones in Mississippi. Also, for the species that most visitors tend to care about, we tend to start, or in the visitor's mind, there tend to be some decisions and strongly held opinions on how the management of those species should go. Now, all of the species around that charismatic species don't know, don't care. But don't shoot my wolves if they're getting overpopulated in an area. Don't shoot problem animals unless it's an egregious problem, like with the recent bear cullings in the western United States and southern Canada, where they are attacking and killing hikers and pets. So it gets tricky because, again, like we were talking about on Monday, people have stronger emotions about charismatic species than we typically do for most other organisms. So let's get into a whole bunch of examples on charismatic and non-charismatic species. Okay? On the other hand, with our non-charismatic species, right, people don't like those. And those non-charismatic species have every bit as much the potential or function of being a keystone species. Really important, but not popular in the public eye. And so that means sometimes your visitors can get frustrated or irritated with you out of that difference between the manager's sense or understanding or values or prioritization about resources we have to allocate to this somewhat unpopular species versus, well, why aren't you putting this much visible effort, at least, into this other species that I really do care about because it's fuzzy and cute, or something like that. Okay? Now, for all of our sort of example characteristics of what makes a charismatic megafauna species, There are going to be exceptions to that rule, and same thing with non-charismatic species. We have some creatures that are so ugly you can't help but love them, right? So here's kind of an example of both. We have a sphinx and a baby llama or alpaca, and right on just an initial emotional level, before our training kicks in, we have a response to this. Yeah. So your affect changes when you see this video just a little bit. Maybe you're in a slightly better mood, or you're feeling slightly horrified, or you just don't know how to feel about this juxtaposition of cute and horrifying. We all have a response to this, whether or not it's small, whether or not it's well informed, and this is what we're dealing with as park rangers. Okay? So, here we go. Characteristics that tend to put a species or population into non-charismatic or charismatic categories or thought processes, respectively. If it's a reptile, so scaly or exposed skin, so like that sphinx cat. If it's cold-blooded, that is non-homeothermic. The more distance or perceived distance it has from human physiology, the less likely we are to understand it in an empathetic way. Okay? So, if it is less anthropomorphizable, like leeches, for example, don't have a human-like face, then we're less likely to feel the same way about leeches versus something like a manatee. And leeches and manatees share some habitat, but they look really pretty different. And if you think about it, a manatee is sort of a weird-looking thing. It's kind of a horrifying thing, except it's got those cute faces. They're so cute. And they behave in a way that feels to human beings different than the way we feel a leech behaves. Okay? So, our charismatic species again, right? If it's fuzzy, feathered, warm-blooded, if it's more like us, if it has a human-like face in particular, if its growth stage for the individual organism is exceptional because it is very young, we tend to have a protective instinct around perceived newborns, and then also have a desirous instinct around trophy specimens. And most of our national parks, again, are going to be core habitat for a lot of these species. So, trophy specimens, record breakers of size, volume, mass, antler points, whatever. We're going to see these a lot in parks, more typically than we see them in other places. Okay? Again, bright coloration, so tropical songbirds, for example. And then game species like elk, like bison, like bears, like anything that might potentially taste good to people who enjoy eating animals. So, a couple of examples. Now, if you like iguanas and bearded dragons and so on and so forth, maybe you have one as a pet at home, I get you, I feel you, right? Beardies are awesome. But a lot of people get a little bit squeamish around reptiles and amphibians. The hellbender, the mud puppy, variants of or relatives of salamanders, that sort of thing. Like, if it looks slimy, oh my gosh, major gross out factor for a lot of people. Now, a lot of other folks love salamanders. They understand that salamanders and similar creatures like newts are critically important as indicator species. They're the first to go as our water quality drops. But this is not like you and me. Oh God, it eats bugs. Ew, right? Even though the World Health Organization strongly suggests that if we want to feed everybody following the depletion of mineral phosphorus on the surface of the earth, you're going to have to eat a lot of bugs, or at least insect protein. All right? Bats freak a lot of people out. It's warm-blooded. They're fuzzy. They have faces like us. But those weird skin flaps, ooh, right? That squicks some people out. Arthropods, so ticks, spiders, and stuff like that, right? In a lot of, especially nutrient-poor places, nutrient-depleted places, arthropods have a huge and central role in cycling those limited nutrients around. But When we go backpacking at Canyonlands, for example, we get freaked out every time we run across a black widow spider on its web. It's just kind of scary. Very different from us, and they pose a perceived danger. So we keep on moving. Stink bugs, etc., right? Stinging insects, stuff that's bitey, not so good. And unfortunately, this makes conservation and habitat management a little bit harder, because when sometimes your visitors encounter a less charismatic species, even inside your national park, if they have sort of an unexpected encounter with a less desirable species, even one that is critically important in ecosystem structure and function, like sharks. I think this is maybe a goblin shark? I don't know. Sometimes they can harm or kill that less desirable creature in your park, and even come back to the visitor center or find you at the campground or whatever and say, hey, we tried to help you out. There's this snake sunning itself on the trail, so we grabbed our trowel and popped its head off, right? Job well done. And you're thinking, oh God, that was an endangered rattler of some kind, right? So this is kind of the thought process that some people have, right? People will justify, or the term that we'll use this semester a little bit later on is rationalize their actions in order to fit a worldview where their actions are positive and contributory. But less charismatic species, non-charismatic species like this one, that just kind of makes your job a little bit harder, because some people are going to freak out and respond in a negative or even injurious way to those wildlife species. Okay? So, we care a lot about detritivores. We care a lot about fungal species. We care a lot about motile organisms or low sessile organisms in marine and freshwater or estuarine systems, like anemone, filter feeders, stuff like that. But those don't look anything at all like cute and cuddly. In fact, they look like something out of Call of Cthulhu, if you're familiar with the works of H.P. Lovecraft, and it just kind of squicks people out. So this is the stuff that can get pretty badly injured or damaged as a function of just people's opinions about it, unfortunately. Okay, now with charismatic species, on the other hand, we all kind of get this, right? Your grandmother has been forwarding you these emails since before you were born, right? It's cute, it's fuzzy, it's warm-blooded. Look, that's a wildlife species on late night television. Oh my gosh, it's an actual teddy bear, and it's not yet big enough to rip your face off. Not yet. We tend to anthropomorphize, right? So I pull up my sheets at night too. Birds, they're just like us. And so we tend to, or some people, some visitors tend to try to treat wildlife like humans, that is, feeding them. We've referred already in this class to the multiple different people at places like Yellowstone National Park. This happens not as a one-off thing. This is not an every month kind of a thing, but may or may not be every year. If there's a calf separated from the bison herd at Yellowstone or Grand Teton, somewhere like that, John D. Rockefeller Memorial Parkway, somebody in a minivan gets a really, really hefty fine when they sort of jostle that calf into their minivan and seat belt it in and try to drive it back to the herd. And it's like, no, this is doing a lot more damage, right? So this is causing that young of the species to pick up human scent, and it can lead to rejection by the herd and so forth. So charismatic species don't have it really easier than non-charismatic species do. They're both at risk, but for the opposite reason, right? We're trying to take care of charismatic species. We're trying to sometimes eradicate non-charismatic species, and both of those extrema are wrong. So often the approach is to provide wildlife viewing opportunities without providing direct contact opportunities where that's possible. Okay, so Think about wildlife viewing points where herds tend to gather, but that are separated by a small cliff face. And most visitors aren't going to descend the cliff face to get out to the herd. Now, somebody enterprising is always going to try and find a way, but we can deal with those with a law enforcement ranger interdiction type response instead of a site design approach of putting that wildlife viewing platform on a cliff or behind a fence, or put a bunch of spotting scopes out there. You guys have all seen those at various national parks. Okay, so for various reasons, things like physical conformation, the shape in which a sea otter, a seal, walruses to a less extent, like it's not smiling right now, but it kind of looks like it if you squint a little bit, right? And so people will assume that this thing is happy, it's smiling. And it's the same mistake that people are making when they see a dog showing its teeth. They go, oh, the dog is smiling at me. And that's either a fear or aggression response, right? So when we smile at a canine, we are sending an aggression message, and we think we're smiling. And so that can lead to things like attacks, can lead to defensive charges in the case of wildlife, and so forth. So this is tricky, okay? All right? This is a noisy video clip. You can almost hear this guy going, hey guys, what's up? How you doing, right? It looks like he just told a funny joke. That is not at all what that organism is actually doing. But just looking at it, man, that thing sure is cute. That guy has a smile just like one of my drinking buddies, right? These are the anthropomorphized messages that we superimpose on a wildlife species, okay? Now, if you've seen any Disney or Pixar movie that involves wildlife species that are on purpose anthropomorphized, like they speak English and they are cartoon or 3D animated and so forth, that's not doing us any favors. We are, in a sense, if you want to think about it, in competition with organizations like Disney or DreamWorks or Pixar in terms of helping people understand what this animal is doing, what it is signaling, and how we can appropriately interact or not with it. Okay, so three-toed sloths, not at all what most people think about when they're watching movies like, what was it, Zootopia, I think, was one of those. So we tend to anthropomorphize these in proportion to the strength of these characteristics, and one thing that we are in competition with, like Disney or Pixar, but we can never match, is the viral reach of memes or image macros. I don't know what these are. And that's funny, like as you're sipping your coffee or Monster Energy drink, whatever you drink in the morning. And what these image macros, what these short video clips on TikTok and etc. are doing is they are stripping context. We've got this 3-second looping video clip of a brown bear waving. Okay. Is it waving though? Waving is a human communicative action. So even if you train your dog to wave or shake hands, the dog isn't shaking hands, it's responding to a command with a behavior that it has been taught means a reward, like food, for example. And wildlife typically doesn't have the benefit of even that training. So what we see as a wave doesn't, like, there's no concept of wave to a bear, okay? Cool. So I'm heading to Japan over Christmas. I'll give you a full report on the hot spring monkeys. We'll see how that goes, but the tourism industry in a lot of cases, because they have a profit motive instead of a resource protection and visitor experience motive, or mandate if you like with our National Park Service, this charisma, this is big bucks, right? This is the difference between an $8 an hour public bath onsen or hot spring bath in Japan versus $200 an hour. Now, if you're trying to put food on the table and you live near these monkeys in Japan, what are you going to do, right? You're going to lean into all of the videos that people have seen of these. These are famous around the world, right? And you don't need to know anything about them to have that initial emotional response of, oh my God, I would love to go hang out in the spa with these guys for a day, right? And, humans and monkeys don't always interact safely. So, it's a thing. It is a thing, and it's never not going to be a thing. So we just want to be aware of some of these characteristics and understand the clout motive, understand the for-profit motive. You see those tourist huts in the background? Okay. See the instinct, even sort of prior to motive, the instinct of people to map human motivation, understanding, behaviors onto wildlife species. Typically, these bird species are doing things like range finding and 3D spatial recognition by moving their heads, because a lot of bird species have prey-style monocular vision out to either side, almost 360 vision, kind of like a horse. And that means they don't have the stereoptic binocular vision that we do, and so they don't see the world in 3D quite the way that we do. And so they're moving in ways that look kind of vaguely human dance-like, maybe a little bit, but they're doing something completely different. And our instinct is to not care about what they're actually doing, but to find meaning in it. If you want to think about human perception on a neuroprocessing level, your brain is an electrical meat sack whose primary job, at least in terms of perception and recognition, is to do contrast resolution. To look in any particular direction around this classroom, for example, and see this area over here is maroon colored, and it's got a particular shape and texture and albedo or reflectance, and it's got a certain size relative to my perceived distance to it. And so I'm going to resolve the contrast of all of those characteristics against the white cinder block painted wall right behind that chair. And then to identify that object as a chair. And then to persist that object as chair is over in this direction when I move, when my visual field shifts away from it, and when I look back, I expect to see chair there. Okay? We are contrast resolution organisms, and our brains are contrast resolution organs. So, what that means is when we see a behavior like this, we're going back through our index of, okay, what motions and behaviors look like what I am perceiving? That looks a little bit like dancing. Okay, that bird must be dancing. And the bird's not dancing at all. So, the profit motive, the clout motive, the anthropomorphization motive, or drive or instinct, the contrast resolution, all of these things, we map human understanding, values, behaviors onto these particular creatures, right? So cute. Who hasn't chased birds as a kid, right? Buckle up, seatbelts on for safety, buddy, right? Oh, he's throwing a tantrum. It's so cute. And then he bites your leg and you have to have the leg amputated. Right, okay. Like, who hasn't balanced on something before and done the wavy arms thing, right? All of these behaviors get mapped unconsciously very quickly. Otters are, we describe them as what? What kind of verbs or adjectives would you use to describe otters, or your best understanding of otters? I would call them playful. Does that make sense? Okay. Is the otter playing? Maybe, maybe not. Okay. So, the more they are like us, the more they appear to enjoy things like us, the more we are going to alter our behaviors and potentially cause a problem in that intensified encounter, because this is very close range, right? This can change in its safety proposition for both the wildlife and for the person really very quickly. So, horses, hugely empathic animals. Horses, they've been with us for the past 10,000 years in their currently evolved form, or selectively bred form. And they are deeply ingrained in human culture and symbolism and cinema and our myths and legends. So, Odin, the Norse god, right, had a horse. And you know it was a god horse because it had a whole bunch of extra legs. 6 or 8, depending on which source you read. And that's pretty cool. I think the Final Fantasy version of it had 6, and then in the Old Norse myths, closer to 8. But a horse with 8 legs is cool. A spider with 8 legs, not cool. Okay? So when we try to superimpose our heavily romanticized or heavily marketed, right? Horses sell a lot of movie tickets, for example. They sell a lot of dollars in boarding facilities and trail riding and outfitting, even here just in southern Illinois. In southern Missouri, where we're going for a field trip, people will bring horses 10,000 strong to...
that ride was just last weekend.
Cross-country trail ride? Cool.
I think that's the one, whatever the big one is over there.
Yeah, that's one of them. They'll bring in country stars, and people will be there for anyway from a couple of hours, just kind of passing through and hanging out with folks, enjoying American horse culture, up to a couple of months. And CCTR, Cross Country Trail Rides, the organization, I think, last time I checked, they had just over 10,000 stalls for horses. Like, that's a lot. You can see how it's deeply ingrained in not just American identity or Western identity, but also for these particular folks coming for a couple of months with their horses to hang out and enjoy horse culture at CCTR over in Eminence, Missouri, right where we're going to go. That's like a big chunk of their identity. I am a horse person is the kind of statement you would hear if you were asking about that kind of stuff. And so we get things like this. This is from the Illinois Equine Industry and State Horsemen's Association, or Horse People Association. And these are boxes for the cremains of your horse. So, you know, if you're a filthy, degenerate mouth breather, you could just, like, send your horse to a meat plant, although that's not really happening in the United States anymore. Now they're trucked over the border down to Mexico. But if you're an actual human being with a heart, you're going to pay to have your horse cremated and get a nice wooden box for it. And this is somebody's business. This is their livelihood. They can make pretty good money doing this because of how much we care about that emotional bond we can forge with certain species. So, this is a big deal. Organisms like whales, right? Super exciting. So something like this is a life-changing moment. Look at that body language on the person down front. This is the emotion of fiero. Like, oh my God, this is amazing. Laser beams coming out of my eyes. Level of awesome, right? Going full Super Saiyan here in the middle of the ocean. Or just right by the shore. But this is super important to a lot of people. Okay? This one's a little bit scarier, but it's accessing that same space in your brain. Now, being toyed with by orca, not cool. Do you see how the person responds behaviorally to that? Instead of going like this, they're like, oh my God, my stand-up paddleboard is the same shape as this thing's primary food source. I'm fine. That's okay. It's fine. This is fine. Everything's fine. Okay? So, Charismatic species, we just got a whole bunch of examples of these. These are whales using their bubble trails to school fish and then eat all the fish. And you get everybody's super excited response. The whales are just trying to feed, right? They're just trying to exist. But humans attach meaning to these behaviors and these moments. And understandably so, like none of us is immune to this, okay? This is a system designed to exercise and rehabilitate injured newborn sea turtles in the hopes of improving anything about their chances at survival. We talked on Monday about how 1 in 1,000 makes it to adulthood. This is aimed at improving that ratio. Now, what's your response? What's your visceral response to viewing this?
Looks silly.
Okay. Why does it look silly?
It's like, what is it doing? It's making it feel like maybe it's swimming, I guess. But
Exactly. So this is meant to simulate wave motion and gently stress their muscles and skeleton as it's firming up and developing, so that they can exercise a little bit. Pretty cool stuff. But the fact that we have an emotional response to this video in the first place, that's what I'm getting at. Does that make sense? All right, cool. I know we're kind of belaboring the points here, but right? We've all had that sensation of maybe in middle school when you were thinking about asking somebody at the dance and you're sort of trying this out for the first time and it's like, I don't know how this is going to go. And then you kind of freak out, maybe partway through, right? A lot of us have experiences or understandings from our own personal sense of things that we map onto other species. So, again, babies, newborns, hatchlings, or more orca. So, glowworms in New Zealand are not at all human-like, but they're a cool color, and they're weird, and they're unusual, and they're neat. They're not super common and widespread all over the world, so when you have the chance to go do tourism in any of the sea caves, where these things are like all over the roof of that cavern chamber, and you get to paddle through, oh my god, that's like the trip of a lifetime. And the glowworms are just trying to exist. Okay, so bioluminescence. I know this is a little bit blown out with the glare here, but that's essentially a jellyfish. And then trophy specimens. Individual organisms that are looking cute. They're going to be under real high pressure, at least for photos. Which means that because everybody's carrying a cell phone instead of a 35mm with a 400mm lens, like a telephoto zoom lens, we're getting right up to it, right? Most iPhones have a 3x zoom factor. That's terrible. So you got to get right on top of the wildlife in order to get any kind of a decent photo, and especially any kind of decent video. But videos are monetizable. So if we get this, just get that one really cool shot, we can upload it online, make some clout, or get some clout or whatever, and then this is good. But that encounter has an effect on the wildlife as well, and they don't get to build clout, they might starve as a result. Okay, so, man, so cute, so cute. Oh my god, even cuter because it's young. I can't take it, the cuteness is too much. Oh my god. So these are smaller monkeys playing in a summer swimming hole. And haven't we done just exactly the same thing? And I saw a movie with a tiger in it. And that tiger was mean. It was Jungle Book, but that was a pretty cool movie. So, moving on. You get the idea. So those are off in the distance. This is a video from summer camp. These are Mustang ponies galloping in parallel with our bus as we're driving out west towards summer camp. I could I could feel my shoes turning into boots with spurs. I heard guitar music ethereally coming in from the heavens as we drove by this. And they galloped right next to us as we're rolling along on the highway and maintained speed with us for a little while. And then they pulled off, and you could just see their smoke plume after a while. And it was this amazing experience. And it's like, well, actually, Mustang ponies and feral horses out west are a huge, huge problem. Think about how much feed a horse needs with its terrible digestion system and large body that's going to need a lot of calories every day. Think about how little grass you see in frame here. There's very, very low nutrient density across the Sonoran and Mojave Desert floors. So we have 250,000 of these out west. A lot of them are starving, like ribs poking out, and very, very low natality. So the opposite of fatality is natality. It's the birth rate, live birth rate. This is tough. And a couple years ago, we had the former number 2 guy, the deputy director of the Bureau of Land Management, which is a sister organization to the National Park Service that we're mostly focusing on this semester. He's an alum of our program. So he came in and talked one day, and he was telling us about how they have 250,000 too many ponies and feral horses out west, and they are destroying not just little areas, but huge tracts of land, and they need to do something about that. It is completely out of control. So you try to shoot some of them, people get mad, real upset. I drive a Ford Mustang, and you want to shoot what? Mustangs? That sounds like communist talk to me. You're just trying to do range management, right? So you could have auctions and try to get any of those 250,000 extra animals into private ownership. But there aren't 250,000 buyers. You could try to box a whole bunch of them up and send them off to a meatpacking plant in Mexico. People are not cool with that. Can't shoot them, can't keep them alive, can't move them elsewhere. There's nowhere else for them to go. Can't, because anything that is more productive than this is already farmland. So I think the last I heard about this particular effort was they're going to spend something crazy. It's like $1,500 per animal to have sharpshooters clipped or safety harnessed into helicopters that will stampede the horses so you can get access to each one at a distance, and they're going to remote sterilize them with dart delivery systems. That's super dangerous. Helicopters are just trying to explode. And the horses and ponies are starving and they're being stampeded. So it's this is a terrible idea. But the other ideas are even less popular, right? So what do you do when you're the public servant, the park ranger, the range manager, the large animal veterinarian, trying to ease suffering by getting the population to some sustainable level? Maybe the answer is to breed up a whole bunch of wolves, right? But then somebody's going to get mad about that. And people, if they disagree with what you are doing as a public servant, they will let you know, right? The Shawnee National Forest was prevented from doing logging, any kind of logging, for a really long time. The U.S. Forest Service exists in part to provide board feed of timber. That is part of what the Shawnee's mission is about, period. But a lot of folks didn't agree with that. They saw climate change, they saw protecting habitat for non-native woodpeckers that have moved into the planted plots across the Shawnee as a much higher priority. And the courts, for a while, actually sided with the groups bringing that litigation and shut down logging for 25 years, something like that, into the 90s maybe, and beyond. Can't remember when the Forest Service resumed logging. It was 2010, 2011, something like that, but it was a long pause. So even trying to do the right thing, even though there's no single clear right thing to do, can come under fire. no pun intended, and be a real difficult or thorny or kind of a lightning rod issue. So this is tricky. Charismatic megafauna, like those woodpeckers, well, they're not megafauna, but charismatic fauna, they really, really, really push public opinion, and public opinion really, really, really pushes what you can do as the land manager, and so forth. Okay, so we have a difficult relationship with media, and in particular social media. Yeah, social media is the Wild West with mouth herpes of communication forms. So we get a lot of stuff like this. Viral videos. Sometimes the viral videos are well intended. Like, who's gonna argue with this, right? Sometimes the marketing copy or the popular interest article photo spreads are pretty widely distributed. These make for great photo ops, but people don't see any of the context, right? They don't see any of your training that are behind that situation or setup. Oh, it's so cute. Let's get into a splash and slap fight with a bear. This is awesome. I foresee no problems. Okay? Would you like a little bit more? So, in veterinary medicine, there is this concept of responsible, ethical animal breeding for dogs. And then there's the sense of the so-called backyard breeder that just gets a breeding pair and starts basically crapping out low to moderate quality or health puppies and selling those for sometimes up to thousands of dollars and making their living that way. But there's a vast difference between somebody who is well-trained and ethical and working really hard to have extremely healthy, high-quality dogs and somebody who's just trying to make some money selling off puppies. If you're familiar with the concept of a puppy mill, this is the cottage industry version of exactly that. Low-quality animal reproduction programs to do stuff. So when you see a video of somebody who is running a wildlife rehab thing, we get an idea out of that because those videos are very carefully edited. And years of study in a forestry or wildlife rehab or zoology program, that doesn't make for interesting TV, right? Class is boring. So we get the cool shots in situ. And sometimes we also get, as sort of corollaries or tag-ons to those feature documentaries or whatever, we also have private animal-owning individuals who may or may not have a lot of wisdom involved, and it sure does make for great short clips without any context. And by great, I mean terrible. Okay, so here we are. This is a Yellowstone National Park Xanterra Lodge feedback form, and it reads, "Our visit was wonderful, but we never saw any bears. Please train your bears to be where guests can see them. This was an expensive trip to not get to see bears." Like, this is so bad it's good, you know? There was a viral sensation a couple of years ago of like people submitting and then surfacing on social media real or fake like Yelp reviews of national parks. Like, mountains were far away, 2 stars. Right? Wildlife figured very heavily into those viral systems. So this ends badly for the dad. Let's just say he's not going to have any more kids. You can just hear the scream even though it's muted, right? God bless that child. Okay. Here's a clip from the show Lost, if you guys remember that one. Boy, that one started out Game of Thrones style. We had such high hopes, and then it just petered out into nothing. Also Game of Thrones style. So it's a thing. Have you ever played around at the beach? Yeah. So cartoonists have actually picked up on this human-wildlife dynamic and have flipped the premise on its head, right? Ice bucket challenge. Well, she may now have some neurological symptoms like people who have legitimate multiple sclerosis. Okay? So, things that we think are a great idea, you throw a wildlife species, a prey species like a horse, which is genetically sort of predestined, if that's your theology, to respond by spooking and panic running, right? We have great hopes for them as humans, but they are not humans, and they're going to respond how a horse responds. Even a highly trained animal is going to freak out over a bucket of ice getting dumped on it. Okay? So, a vicious lion attack. No, this guy actually helped rehabilitate these. Right? Seeing experts play with wildlife creatures. Look, they're holding hands! They can't hold hands, they don't have hands. And the paws that they do have don't have prehensile fingers, right? It's not the same thing. So, the examples continue. I genuinely feel bad for these guys. They're trying to make the memory of a lifetime with involving, in this case, for some reason, wildlife in their wedding. And they're never going to forget this, right? They're never going to get that stain out either. Okay. So it does also go the other way, right? We see certain very important species like timber wolves as romanticized, but in a negative direction. Has anybody seen the movie The Revenant? The guy gets his shit pushed in a bear attack and legit dies. Spoiler alert. It's Leo DiCaprio in between and chasing down very young women, I guess. And that movie the movie underscores the danger that guy is in by not cutting away from it. It shows the entire bear attack from one end to the other in one long continuous shot, and it's brutal to watch. And that's a lot of people's understanding or best guess at what bears do, how bears are. And that is not inaccurate, but it's also not a complete picture. It doesn't have a ton of context about bears. It's just about a 2-minute long mauling scene in a movie. Okay? So, this is the context that a lot of your visitors are coming from. So, the entire discipline or field within forestry of environmental interpretation is to help message to people, to help them understand a healthier, more correct, more sustainable understanding of your wildlife species, among other things. Wildlife are perennially a focus of environmental interpretation and environmental communication at visitor centers, in junior ranger guidebooks, in campfire talks, in guided hikes, all of this stuff, constantly beating on the drum of this is what our wildlife are really like. And this is why they're like that. And this is how you and I and everybody here can safely and sustainably interact with those wildlife and enjoy them at a distance. Constantly on that message and trying to find different ways to get it across. Okay? So, the messaging, we have tried everything. Like humor, we've tried slapping skull and crossbones symbols, international symbols for death, hazard symbols, warnings, threats of lawsuits and jail time, nice, fuzzy, kind, happy educational messaging, everything to try and help people understand, hey, we're not in the movie The Revenant, but we're also not in a Disney movie here. These are real, live, wild animals. And your preconceptions of what they are may not be correct. So, there are all sorts of wasps, that some of which are non-native and are horrifying to people, and some of them are actually genuinely dangerous. We just don't get it because a 2D picture doesn't convey a sense of scale, and most importantly, it doesn't convey any sense of the aggression of Africanized bees or wasps. This is not one, but wasps like the tarantula hawk, which is about this long tip to tail and is big enough and mean enough to sting a full-grown tarantula out in the Sonoran Desert, paralyze it, drag the tarantula across the open desert floor, which is not easy terrain, back to its nest so it can lay its larvae in the still living paralyzed tarantula, and those larvae can have nice, fresh, still living food, right? That is, if Satan wanted to unleash a wasp upon humanity, it would be a tarantula hawk. And people just, they're not thinking about that, right? They're out for a hike on a nice day. So, that is the scale of a grizzly bear's hind paw. The biggest one I've personally seen was exactly the height of my waistline to my collarbones. That's the size or the length of one of its back paws. These can literally decapitate a human being in a single swing. It's a pretty good attack strategy if you think about it, leveraging their strength and their momentum. Okay, so just if you have like personal trauma associated with forestry, I applaud you for showing up to your classes, but also look away from this next slide. It shows some tree destruction. We don't think about, or maybe we don't want to think about the risk or power that some wildlife wield. Do bull elephants stampede safari convoys from time to time? If the safari convoys get too close, you're gosh diggledy darn right. Okay. Now, a creature that can push over a mature tree, something that would take us really pretty specialized equipment to do as humans, it did that over the course of what, 25 seconds? We generally aren't thinking about that. But it sure would be fun to go on a safari. So, we do have to keep in mind scale differences. It's either a golden eagle or a harpy eagle, I can't remember which. But pretty big. These are the ones that are big enough to pick up a goat, like a Dall sheep or mountain goat, like pick it up and fly off with it, drop it off a cliff, and then go eat the exploded remains at the bottom. It's like sushi for birds, right? Fresh and raw. Delicious. But we don't think about birds being that big. Is that big enough to carry off a child? Sure is. What about your family dog that you've taken on vacation with you, where these things are? That makes for a bad trip. But people aren't thinking about that when they're planning their trip. Okay? So it is on us, or it can be on us, to try and let them know. Okay? That's how you get pink eye. Or that's one of the ways that you should get pink eye, right? And most of the others are at hanger. Okay. Let's pause right there on that one.